Call the meeting to order. I'll turn it over to Ms. Greenlee for a roll call.
Absolutely. Good morning. We'll do the roll call for the Citizens Advisory Board
Budget.
presentation.
Yeah.
Scott Vanderpeel.
Here.
Danielle Stanley, I believe, is going to be joining us remotely, but for right now she'll be absent because I don't see her in our Zoom room. Tracy Powell.
Here.
Caroline Pavlovic is absent. Ryan McCray.
Here.
Aiden Keefe.
Here.
Chairperson Raby.
Here.
Robert Johnson.
Here.
Peter Henderson.
Here.
Emmanuel Garcia.
Here.
Rob Castaneda.
Here.
Sonia Del Real has told us that she will be absent. And our other student member, Dr. Ryan Parnell, will also be absent.
Hey, Georgette, I'm here.
Great.
Danielle Stanley's here. Yep.
Nancy,
I was
okay.
presenting at a conference at Bloomington, so sorry I couldn't be there in person.
Right, okay. And if you are able to be on camera, that would be great. If not, it's okay. But it's good to know you're here. Thank you. All right. You have a quorum, and I'll turn the meeting back over to you.
All right, thank you. I was advised that we have no public comments today.
There are no public comments that are registered for today.
Okay, all right, we'll move on to our first staff presentation. Ms. Tom McComb, our Chief Financial Officer. Good morning.
Good morning. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Tom McCone, Chief Financial Officer. Maybe a different face for you. I came into this position in August of this year. But I've been at the CTA for 10 years. I was previously the Vice President of Budget and Capital Finance and also the Chief Administrative Officer. So it is not unfamiliar territory to me. I am joined here too. Behind me, we have Lisa Smith, Director of Budget. Jeff Overcat, who's the VP, Budget and Capital Finance. So I am going to start this morning with the presentation on our operating budget. And then I'll walk you through that. I know that you have copies of the budget book that we released last week, so I'm glad that you have that. It's obviously going to have much more detailed information than in this overview, but just start with the overview and I'll try and hit the highlights. All right. So themes for the budget. So this year, 4 themes. One, enhancing service and reliability. So we'll talk about some of the additional service hours that are part of the budget. In maintaining our investments in cleaning, we've added additional workforce this year to improve the cleaning of the vehicles and the stations, and those are maintained through next year. Safety and security, so our budgeted levels of security reflect the actual expenditures that we've been experiencing this year. And then maintaining investments in employees, so providing additional training resources, along with investments in back of the house facilities, things like washrooms and other things that are critical to our employees and maintaining a quality workforce. So the summary of the operating budget, it's a $2.16 billion operating budget impacted primarily by service levels and also wage increases this year. The capital program at $6.95 billion is a little bit higher than we typically see in a 5-year program, and that's because we're putting in the red line extension funding as part of that, including those $2 billion in federal funding that are coming online. Ridership growth, we're projecting at a rate of 25% over the 2024 budget. In part, that's recognizing growth that we've already seen this year, so an actual growth, and then projected growth next year, continuing on that trend. And then the gap that we have, we require federal relief funding of $578 million, which we're projecting we will have available for us in 2025. That relief funding would run out in 2026. Some of the highlights, in addition to the increased service levels, we're anticipating no fare changes, ridership retention growing to that 80% level, maintaining those workforce investments. We're moving some of capitalization of labor and materials onto the operating budget, so to kind of normal operating expenditures. That frees up a little bit more funding on the capital investment side. Traction power is increasing. So we talked about some of the commodities that we purchased. Electricity costs have gone up for everybody. We are also an electricity user. And so Those are built into our budget as well. And then we're maintaining those investments in the outreach programs that we have, that $2 million investment we have for those social service programs, and continuing that outreach next year. So a little more detail on the operating budget. Here's the schedule of all the numbers, and I'm going to start to break down some of those numbers on these future pages. So let's start on the revenue side of it. So for those of you that are not familiar with our operating budget and our operating revenues, you can see here we get $1.1 billion in public funding primarily through the sales tax. So that's the city and the regional sales tax that flows through the RTA and to the CTA. You'll see a smaller chunk to the right of that, which is our fare and pass revenue. That's $369 million that we're projecting for next year. Some smaller things, advertising, some of our free ride reimbursement, which is de minimis compared to the amount of free and reduced rides that we provide. We would expect that share to be more like $100 million if you were actually looking at the value of those rides. And then the gap there being filled with that federal relief funding. Just looking at the trend in that public relief or public funding, not the relief funding, but the actual sales tax funding that comes to us and some of that other public funding. And I'll highlight a couple of components of this just to make sure that you're familiar with it. So this bottom line here is kind of that's kind of the baseline that the public funding gets built off of. That is the sales tax. That's the 1% sales tax in the city of Chicago. It's also 30% of that 1% sales tax that's in Cook County. So that's kind of the base of kind of what gets built on top of that. On top of that, you can see there's sales tax 2, and this is actually growing at a slightly smaller rate, even though it is sales tax, and it's that 0.25% rate that's in Chicago and across the region. This funds ADA paratransit funding before it flows through to the CTA. So both sales tax 1 and sales tax 2 are kind of taken off of a very similar base, but sales tax 2 comes to us after it goes to fully fund paratransit throughout the region. So that one is growing at a slightly smaller rate and actually diminishing in 2025 because of the funding that's going to paratransit in advance of it. On top of that, you have some state matching funds there. You see the real estate tax in yellow here. What you'll notice on that is the variability of that one, right? It's not kind of steady growth like you might see on sales tax. It's impacted by real estate transactions, and it can be heavily impacted by commercial real estate transactions. So this year it's coming in under budget because of the high interest rates. We've seen less real estate transactions. We hope that reducing those rates encourages more real estate transactions, and then that can grow. Sometimes it can be positive, right? Where it grew here from 50 million to 70 million, right? It's like a 40% increase. Other times, it can go the other direction where it goes from 80 million down to 53 million. So there's always that kind of variability, and this is what drives some of the variability in public funding that we see. And then on top of that, you have non-statutory funding. This is that match state funding that comes to us that's attached to the real estate tax and to the sales tax.
Can I ask a question about this?
Sure, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
No, but I'm curious to know, so I'm assuming the last bar is 2024 and we're going backwards there, right?
This is 2024, this is 2025 over here. Yeah, so this is the budget number. Yep.
So I was just trying to see, gauge in my mind, like what was going on in those time frames where there was like a smaller amount coming from those real estate taxes, and just kind of like thinking back to like earlier during the pandemic and some of the issues that were occurring in the housing market that impacted that, that are much different from what we're looking at right now. And just moving forward, like what the thinking, reducing that amount, is it helpful to do that, to reduce that rate? Because I feel like there are other pressures at play that really contribute to that lessened amount than what CTA is taking out of it. So I just want to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the challenge with it is the high variability, right? The fact that, interest rates go down and people buy more property, right? And then we see a lot more transactions. They go up and we see less, and it just makes it hard to predict off of that and to have certainty around that prediction. I will say, dating back to when this was put in place in 2008, it has never performed at the level that it was anticipated to, because originally it was put in place to help cover some of our additional pension costs, right? The 100.
In 2008, that's
Yeah.
when.
Exactly. So it never has fully funded those additional pension costs that we have from some of the debt that we had to issue. So it just hasn't, right? I mean, we'll take the funding and we're glad to offset some of those additional costs, but the operating budget has had to assume more of them because the transfer tax just hasn't provided that level of both stability and also sort of the size that we would need to cover those additional costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So moving from public funding and sales tax side of things over to the other revenue, fare box revenue, which is of course driven by ridership. So you can see this year really strong results that we're anticipating for 2024, and this is kind of what we're on track to achieve here. Is this 13% growth, puts us kind of in the upper tier of growth rates among comparable transit agencies this year. So we've really seen a boom in terms of ridership growth this year. A lot of that is because we have been able to hire and to ramp up our service. So our service levels have gone up and ridership has responded to those increased levels of actual service delivery that's on the streets. So we're projecting next year kind of continuing that growth and continuing that growth rate here. To grow up to 364 million, which will put us at an 80% retention rate over those 2019 levels. Much higher on bus than it is for rail. That's a trend that we have seen throughout the recovery period, where the bus recovery has been stronger than the rail recovery by about that difference, by about 20 points, where you're seeing a rail recovery or a bus recovery might be at 80%, that rail recovery might be at 60%. So we're projecting that to continue. Obviously, you know, there's more room for growth now than you see on the rail system, right? Because it still has that gap of where it was, you know, even providing 2019 service levels. So I'm going to shift from revenues to expenses. So on the expense side, we've got a big pie chart here, and you can see big piece of the pie is taken up by labor expenses, right? And labor expenses are pretty much driven by service levels, because these are folks that are operating the vehicles directly, sitting in the seats, or they're maintaining the vehicles either by fixing them or cleaning them, or they're maintaining the tracks, right? So that's the vast majority of our labor budget, directly impacted by the levels of service that we put out there. You can see here that in the budget, we have increased the number of service hours. So we're 4.1% higher than we will be this year. And that's actually 5.8% higher than we were in 2019 in terms of the levels that are good at the budget, and then a part of the schedule. In addition, we have contractual wage increases. So this year in July, we executed an agreement with our main labor unions. So the Amalgamated Transit Union, which gave them a 4% wage increase, which was effective on July 1st of this year. So that 4% growth is then incorporated into this labor budget. On the material side, we have an older fleet, right? We've got pretty old buses at this point. We're also putting out additional service, which is going to impact that material budget. And then we've got the price of inflation that drives that increase in material expenditure. Fuel and power, as I mentioned, you know, fuel costs, we're actually budgeted price per gallon for diesel is going to be a little bit lower this in 2025 than it was this year. But that electricity rate has gone up by 40 or 50% just because of the cost of the supply and delivery of that electricity, which everybody here is probably seeing in their bills themselves. So we are no different. On the security services side, that budget is 88.5 million. You can see it's 4% of our total operating expenses. That's primarily to fund our contractual services, whether they be with uniformed police or with the unarmed security guards or others. And then some of the additional technologies that we're putting out on the system as well. And other expenses, it's a 16% of our total budget. It includes our pension obligations are in there. So it's a lot of our debt service around the pension that I mentioned when we talked about the real estate transfer tax. Some of the additional TIFIA debt services in there, along with our contractual services, including what we pay for our fare systems through Ventra. So putting those two together, we have the proposed budget this year has a gap of $579 million, which will be filled by the available federal relief funds. That leaves a little bit left. That's this area in pink here, 66 million to go into 2026. But we anticipate, you know, fully utilizing those funds in the first quarter of 2026, and then leaving that gap here in those plan years of 26 and 27 that, of course, we're actively looking to fill and find revenue sources to fill that gap to maintain the service that we're putting out there. Those public funding that I talked about, sort of that statutory public funding that we looked at, that's projected to grow at a rate of 3.6% and then 3.1% in those future years. So it's growing, maybe not as fast as we'd like it to grow, but we do want to, it's good to see it on a continued growth trend as well. And then, so one of the things that we look at when we've highlighted this, and President Carter has done a good job of highlighting sort of the revenue gap, and what we should be thinking about as we look to fill that revenue gap is kind of what's the funding per trip or the funding per rider that we have. And so we did a little bit of a comparison here. We looked at that subsidy per passenger trip and how do we compare to other agencies. And one of the things that we have been noting is that the public subsidy per rider at the CTA is significantly lower than it is at other agencies. And so, historically, we have been kind of underfunded. We've been able to, kind of survive and bump from crisis to crisis. But I think the larger problem, an issue that we're trying to address is the fact that we need to improve the subsidy that's offered per rider at the CTA. And you could see that we're just underfunded compared to some of those other agencies and relative to some of our peers, our sister agency peers as well. So that wraps up the operating budget, and I'll pause here for questions before we go into the capital program.
Okay, so back to the
Yep.
previous slide. So how does that get addressed if we are, historically we've been underfunded? In what ways does that get addressed?
Yeah, I think there's, obviously we look ways in which we can find additional revenues to provide that subsidy that's underfunded, right? I mean, what it does is it leads to that the size of the fiscal cliff that we're facing, right? It's that level of public funding and that gap that we have. And so we want to highlight the fact that it's about addressing that gap in funding and finding those funding sources that are necessary to kind of remedy this and sort of focus on, okay, what level of revenue is needed? And we highlighted that on the previous page, right? To fill that gap. And that here, unlike some of the other areas, and to be fair, they are also facing gaps as well. Maybe not to that same level that we are, but we know that Philadelphia, San Francisco, WMATA, and others, right? They are facing gaps themselves and looking to provide additional subsidy on top of what they're already providing as well. So this is not different here, the conversation that we're having. It's very similar to what we're having in other areas. I think maybe the size here can be a little bit of like, okay, $500, $600 million, a pretty significant size, but it's not outside the realm of the public funding that residents of other cities are receiving.
And so I assume that like these other cities in the CTA there's been conversations about how to be creative and closing those gaps. I know that, CMAP, other local agencies have been working, like RTA, I know, have been coming up with some ideas.
Yeah, this is figuring the conversations with the legislature.
Right.
And yeah, we're not alone, right? PACE and Metra, right? They're facing a gap as well. And RTA has been vocal about the need to address this gap and sort of, ways in which we could do that.
Is there anything you can do without the state legislature? Is there anything that CTA can do as an agency to raise more revenue, or does it all have to go through state law?
I mean, revenue, the tools that we have in our control, obviously from a revenue standpoint is the fare box, right? You would say, okay, we would look to the fare box potentially, right, for additional revenue. Also within our control is some of the expense side of things, right? But for the most part, we don't have the authority to. We would look primarily to the fare box if we're looking on the revenue side of things.
So I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll get to this later in the presentation, but I remember So for me personally as a writer, and anytime I turn in the news and people are kind of griping about transit or CTA, a lot of it is around like communication. And I remember in the presentation we had several months ago, like in 2024, with all our devices in our hand, just not understanding why we can't get real time, right? Nothing more frustrating than waiting for a bus, and then it doesn't come, and then the next bus doesn't come, and then the next bus doesn't come. And then you finally come to your rideshare and commuting, and then you see 3 buses in a row, like all coming to the stop. And so while I understand the, more service is going to equal more riders, but it's also like more expense, right? In spite of like a fiscal cliff or a huge budget shortfall next year. Has anything been done this year, since we do have those federal dollars, to help us have like that real-time communication? Because my experience personally is I rely on CTA less because it's just unreliable, right? If I need to get somewhere important, I can't take the bus to the train because it's like, 50-50 whether or not that bus is going to come. And so I wonder in this budget, and I'm asking because with that, for me, being one of the biggest complaints I experience and I hear from other people, but I don't kind of see it in this general overview, like we're doing anything better to communicate with riders. And to me, that kind of points directly to rider retention more so than, increasing, consistent expenses, and then contributing to the budget gap, right?
So there's 2 things, and I do think we'll touch on this a little bit later in the presentation when we talk about some of the performance information. So there's a short answer, which is yes, we are in this budget is continued investments in improving both the reliability and then the accuracy of communications. There's a particular tool called disruption management that's getting rolled out on the bus side to help enable that. Now, I can mention it by name, but the details of it, I wouldn't be able to go into those details here, right? But, there are investments being made and we're continuing to, and then there's the upgrade to Ventra 3.0 too, as well, to improve that customer connection. So we are maintaining investments in both improving actual reliability and then the accuracy of those communications. The other is, as has probably heard, right? Filling the service critical, right? Like that starts and foremost with making sure that you've got an operator in the seat to get the bus out there. And of course, we're continuing to hire to make sure that we're hitting those, 95, 99, 100% service delivery areas. Now, you still might get buses that are running back to back, and then it's important to communicate kind of accurately kind of what that is between the buses when you do see some of those street disruptions.
Yeah, and I would say like as a rider, totally understand people not coming to work, totally understand traffic or construction, delays, right? What I don't understand is the lack of communication.
Yeah.
Right? Like if the bus isn't going to be there in 10 minutes, don't say the bus is going to be there in 10 minutes. It's not going to be there in 20. So then as a rider, I can make adjustments. I can do a ride share. I can ask somebody for a ride to the train, right? I see it in other cities, all over the place in public transit. I just don't know why we don't have it here. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the feedback.
I had a question, just to make sure I kind of was wrapping my head around it correctly. When you were mentioning the cost of electricity, you said it increased by 40 to 50% from, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, the cost per like megawatt hour. Yep, go ahead.
The cost per megawatt hour, is that from 2024 to budgeting for 2025?
Yes.
Okay. That's a huge jump. And I guess, sorry if these questions are simplistic, but with our members as well, it's, the biggest costs are taxes, labor, and energy. Do you guys go through a similar process that I guess residential or commercial like customers would go through with ComEd, where there's like rate setting, and then you go through the process of disputing it, and there's there's like the whole ICC process, and now I'm like getting way deeper than I can, the water's over my head at this point. But there's this whole, there's a bureaucracy in place to I would hope, try to minimize like 40 to 50% rate increases year over year. Does it work the same way for institutional organizations or sister agencies or?
So I would say yes, and everybody has to pay ComEd for delivery, right? We all have to pay the delivery fee went up by 20%, right? So that's like we're getting electricity delivered, it goes up by 20%, so we have to pay that too. The other is we bid out for supply. So we will put out for bid our supplies. We put that on the market, that ComEd delivers it, right? But we pay for the supply. So the cost of that electricity from the supply side has gone up. A lot of electricity, natural gas, right? Is generating that electricity. Big producer of natural gas, Russia, right? We're not getting as much natural gas from Russia right now, right? So that increased the cost of supply of electricity. And then the third thing that contributed to it, so all three of these are moving in an increased direction. Nothing's going the other way, is the carbon-free rider adjustment meant to help maintain pricing of the electricity coming from the nuclear power plants. And so equalizing those credits, ComEd is recovering some of the additional credits that were provided earlier, which we got the benefit of, right? But now we have to sort of pay for the recovery of some of those credits as well.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's a very big number. And I guess I was also, there are some, expansions happening this year. There's like a new station, there's the pending Red Line extension, there's RPM. So, and these are all great. We should be doing these things, caught myself before the double negative. But I just imagine that's going to further increase the consumption, which on top of the rate it's just a shocking kind of year over year. We fight it annually as well. And it's an expensive process. I get all that. That's just.
I said the same thing when I said
all right.
as well. So I looked at Lisa, I said, you gotta be kidding me, right? Like this is 40% is almost unheard of, right? For a jump in terms of that level. Two good things here. One, right, you can see both fuel and power together, 5% of the budget, right? So overall, it's a lot, right? And we need to keep an eye on it, but it's not as big as maybe some other areas of the budget. The other is, and this just happened because like I said, we bid out our supply. Our supply prices came in a little bit lower than we thought they would for next year. And I can send a report back to the committee to give that, but we do think that the supply price is going to come in lower than maybe we had budgeted for, because that cost of generation that has slowly come down throughout the year. So put together the budget and anticipated pricing when in like April, May. Correct. Yeah, and then the prices came down from there. So we finally executed on that a week ago, and we were able to get some lower prices there. So that should give us some relief throughout the year. Right, consumption's going to increase, right? We put increased service levels out there. We're looking forward to the RPM stations reopening here at the second half of the year. So there's a lot of potentially sort of increased consumption that we're going to see, that we haven't had to account for in previous years too.
Yeah, and I sorry not to just keep beating the drum, but I think we've also understood that, and it's not from ComEd, the name escapes me at the moment, but the kind of larger regional supplier.
PJM.
Thank you, PJM. I didn't want to butcher the acronym. They've been reporting that due to plant closures and stuff, that the cost of supply, you can look forward to it jumping even further in coming years. To whatever extent.
Yeah, we saw it, and if you have the numbers, go ahead and report it, but the July jump, the June or July jump goes up almost by like $10, right? It goes from it almost goes up by $10 in terms of the PJM, right? Portion of it. It just gets applied across the supply, right? So, yeah, that's impacting this as well.
Okay. I mean, it's very illuminating. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then, to whatever extent, I know this is on the 2025 budget, but I feel like the 2026 is kind of the elephant in the room. I could save those questions for later, or I'm happy to follow.
I'll defer to the chair.
Well, let's get through the rest of the
Sure, that's,
presentation.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm hungry, remember?
Yeah. Thank you.
Just a fairly quick question. What we're talking about this particular moment oftentimes is keeping the service that we have working effectively and going. The future, however, I think technology and innovation is the key to get us into the next step of keeping ridership up, keeping finances in control. I noticed in the budget that tech and innovation seem to be a relatively small number. Is it traditionally continuing to grow in the amount of money that we invest in those? Because literally technology and innovation oftentimes can be moontops as well as great solutions.
Yeah, and we continue, as I mentioned, the disruption management program, right, that we're doing to upgrade the bus system and to provide the bus operators with the same thing that you're used to getting in your car, right, which is turn-by-turn directions, right? Like, that's something that has been lagging, right, in the transit industry, to have that same level of information that you get used to in your car because you've had it for 5-10 years, right? And making sure that we're catching up on some of that. So that's in here, and that's a part of the budget. Some of the technology budget comes off the capital program as well. So if it's a major investment, and we talk about things like screens and radios and that kind of stuff, that'll be contained within the capital budget. So a lot of that upgrade is in there. I will mention that this is, again, it's in the capital budget. We have an upgrade for the control center, right? So I don't know if you've heard about the upgrade that's coming to move our control center from where it currently is to Pulaski and Lake, kind of upgrade that control center. But that'll be a massive upgrade in terms of the technology that we have and how we're able to use it and communicate with the operators. The other is the more you get upgrades as you buy new things, right? Like I said, you buy a new car, and your new car, even if it's the standard model, right, comes with a lot more technology than the one you bought 5 or 10 years ago. So when you get on a new bus, right, you see a lot of things that are great, right? You see the screen that's up there, right? You see sort of better customer amenities. You get an old bus, you don't have that screen that's up there showing you what the next stops are and everything else. And so a lot of this is just making sure that we have enough funding to continue to buy and replace some of the old things that we have, because they'll come with a lot of technological upgrades as well.
The other piece of that in innovation is adapting the entire system to how the demand needs us, yes, or how we want to use the system as opposed to how you deliver the system.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the bus vision study, right? And sort of I think looking at it and it's out there. So obviously, you can see the bus vision study, and I don't need to go into a lot of depth, but just as one example, we've seen higher ridership retention on the weekends. So weekend ridership relative to 2019 is higher than the rest of the weekdays. And so when we talk about these additional service hours and increasing these additional service hours, what we're looking at is having more service on the weekends to support where we do see that strength of ridership. To your point, that patterns have changed, right? And people are traveling on Saturdays and Sundays probably a little bit more like they used to, right? And so they're not traveling on Mondays and Fridays the way that they used to. But if we could have a more reliable, more frequent system on Saturdays and Sundays, we're more likely to capture that ridership because we see that maintained demand that's in there.
Good. I'll ask some questions. And forgive me if I get a little too into the numbers, but if I didn't, then I think my public finance professor would get mad at me. And so I guess I'd like to start with the labor expenses. The forecast for 2024 was 3 to 4% under the budget. Are we expecting that same undershoot for the 2025 proposed budget?
No. A lot of that performance came in the first half of this year when we were still hiring and filling existing vacancies and obviously building up our operating workforce. We may have positive labor variance. It's the biggest part of our budget. And, so we don't want it to go over, right? Because it would negatively impact the rest of the budget. But I think you're going to see us be much more on par with the labor forecast. Part of it will depend on how quickly those service hours are added throughout the year, because they won't be added kind of all in bulk on January 1st, right? Those service hours would be added as we have the workforce and as we're able to add those service hours. So you will probably see some favorable variance because of the timing of which that service is added. But I think you're going to see a lot less favorability in 2025, because the favorability this year, as it was the prior year, was a lot about just filling that gap between where we want to be and where we actually are.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I want to say that we can allocate, as much money to labor, but it's the service in the end that matters. And that's what I'm trying to get at there. Purchase of security services in 2024, we were 33% over. So what was the story there?
So we put out more contractual security services than we had originally budgeted for. So we put out more in the summer, more to continue to support some of the areas that needed that additional security investment. You can see the number here that we have budgeted for 2025 is pretty much at the forecasted level for 2024. So we're anticipating maintaining that same level of investment.
Okay. I think it was our safety meeting where we expressed some dissatisfaction with the contractual security forces that we were seeing. Is there any change in vendor there, or just tighter oversight?
Yeah, we talked about this last week at the board meeting, and I know that we all sort of heard the board kind of discuss the similar topic. And as the security department stated, those contracts are going to be up for bid. So I think we're looking at both the scope of those services, right, and the level that they'll be provided at. That does present a little bit of uncertainty in the budget, not knowing, those contracts will be open. We don't know what final value they'll come in at, but they're projected to go out to bid, because the extension that came to the board was, I think, a 6-month extension. Maybe it was a little bit longer, but just to allow for a rebid or a bid of those contracts for those services.
Thank you. I did want to say I didn't have enough time to compare our averages to every other public transit organization, but I did compare our advertising revenues to WMATA, and ours are better. So thank you.
Thank you. We did the same thing. Yeah, we're surprised, we are at the high end when you normalize it of advertising revenues. And we just renewed that contract with Intersection.
Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to call out was the usage of federal relief funds in 2024. We were under by a lot. What was the story there?
That's the labor variance, right? When you talked about it at the top, right? So less labor expenses means we have to use less federal funding to support those overall expenses.
Oh.
We also have had some contractual savings. So our other expenses, you'll see the forecast, right, is coming in under budget as well. So we're a little bit more positive to budget on the expenses side, when you look at the forecast.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And so then if we're under forecast, but we're expecting higher labor next year, that would make sense for some of the increase in federal relief funds. Is that the whole story though? I'm seeing, right, last year's forecast was 383 million. Next year's budget is an increase of 200 million, but labor's only 150 more. So I guess the other 50 is just spread throughout.
Yeah, you'll see it in materials, power, right? We talked about some of the power increase, and then some of the contractual increases, those increases we have in other expenses for our contracts.
Okay, yeah. And then finally, I think, Katanya, you were kind of getting at this, but once that federal relief funding is gone, we were talking about the price per rider in terms of subsidies. And we were also talking about what CTA can and can't do in terms of revenue and expenses. I think I'm very afraid of the federal relief funding cut, and I'm worried that it's going to mostly harm the bones of Chicago, our working class the most. Is the reduced fare subsidy on the table to be cut with that?
Yeah, if we go back to the revenue side of it, the reduced fare subsidy right now is 17.4 million, but we provide over $100 million worth of rides so that when they're tapping, that's missed revenue that doesn't come through on those. So what we're advocating for in terms of revenues are pointing out that, we're missing a lot here in these unfunded mandates or, minimally funded mandates that we have to provide these reduced and free fare rides, which are fine, right? But, we just want to make sure that we're not losing revenue by doing that, right? And impacting the system. So I think what we would say is that, hey, let's fully fund those reduced and free ride mandates, and that would help address that budget gap we're seeing.
Thank you. That's all I had. I have a follow-up security question. I know what was mentioned earlier was the contractors and that kind of going up for bid. I think my takeaway from our security conversation was around the contractual obligations with CPD. And when we had our security meeting, right, they're using words like when they're available, we get this and that. As a finance person, right, what are we paying for and what are we getting? And does it add up? Because for the amount, like we're talking about, we're giving out like in ridership, which I understand the logic saying like, yeah, if this person paid full fare, but on the service end, like I can tell you from a security standpoint, it doesn't sound like we're getting from CPD what it is that we're paying for. So how does that work for you as somebody responsible for a budget and paying for services, and what are we getting?
So there's a couple things. I'm glad you had the security briefing to talk to them specifically about deployments and sort of the missions that they do and sort of how effective they are. There's two things I'll start with. One is that the policing on the rail system, or at least the dedicated policing, is provided by the CPD's mass transit unit. And that's part of the city's budget. That doesn't show up at all here in CTA's budget. So that planned unit of a couple hundred officers that are the mass transit unit, CPD is paying for that. So as a finance person, great, right? You know what I mean, right? That's not on our budget. I can tell you, we talked to we talked to LA Metro, right? You can look at their budget documents. They spent over $300 million on uniform security in agreements with other agencies, right? So, for us, right, this is something that dates back for a while, right? But CPD has a dedicated mass transit unit that's covered in the city's budget. So great for us from a budgetary perspective. The program that you're speaking of, the Voluntary Special Employment Program, where we'll take officers to work on overtime, right? To assign them, they'll be directed to work on overtime, wherever we think that they're needed, right? So if there's particular hotspots or others that we want to assign them to, they'll work on overtime. Not predictable, because it depends on who signs up for overtime, right? And we know that, police, especially at certain times of the year, they're using all the overtime internally, not allowing sort of overtime in other areas. I would say that that's something that, I'm sure that they mentioned it, right? That they would take more if we could get it, right? So if we had more officers that worked on overtime, that we would fund more through there. I can tell you that we have funded more when they have been available. Have to talk to them about the effectiveness of that particular program in terms of why are we getting, what we're paying for from that program. But I would say in general, right, speaking from a finance perspective, our agreement with CPD is good from our side because the police are picking up sort of those expenses from the core of the policing that they're providing.
Yeah, I guess for me, the money that's being allocated to CPD or CTA, right? They used to have their own police department, right? And there was a budget for that, and that ended up getting rolled into CPD. And to me, my understanding, there's an expectation of services that go along with that. But I also, from that briefing that we had, I also recognize that that's not the case, because a lot of times they're saying, well, they say this is what we're supposed to get, and then they end it with when it's available, right? And so while I understand like that budget not being here, us not having the cost, the expenses of like maintaining the police department, being responsible for the police department, I kind of look at it as an outsider as like, hey, no, that's money that's allocated for security on CTA. Not like, oh, there's supposed to be 10 officers, but today we have 5. And so at least you don't have to account for it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I feel like that's why security has picked up these additional contracts, right? To say, hey, we need to supplement some of what we're getting from a policing standpoint with some other support as well.
I guess that's my issue though, right? Like we shouldn't, I can understand supplementing if we're fully getting the value that we're supposed to be getting. I don't understand supplementing when there's, or I guess, are we tracking that even, right, on the finance side? Are we tracking for the amount that's supposed to be going to CPD for security service on CTA? Is that even being provided so that we're subsidizing, subsidy another 80 million, right? Like how much of that are we doing because we're not getting the full value of what is set aside for services from CTA on CTA?
So we're certainly tracking what we're paying for, right? So we're certainly tracking that voluntary employment program, which I should highlight too is not just with CPD. We do have it with some suburban districts as well, and we do pay for some of that voluntary employment as well. But we're certainly tracking it from an expense standpoint. I know that security is tracking it from a kind of what are the resources that we're getting out of it, and they would have more of those specifics of who's showing up and how much of a gap is there between what we're requesting and what we're actually receiving.
Are we tracking CPD side?
We are not tracking CPD's tracking their side of it, right? So we could look into it and kind of see where they're at. I think we've all sort of seen where CPD is at broadly, right? So I think we all sort of have a sense of CPD's overall budget and sort of where they're tracking.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know, and I was thinking being the best interest of CTA to know how much are they getting for providing police service on the CTA, and how much of that are we actually getting?
Yeah, I think it's something that we'd have to follow up on because it's in that cities and in that police budget.
Yeah, thank you.
Danielle Stanley, do you have any questions? Can you hear us? Are there any questions from any other members of the board?
Yeah, I just had a quick question, and it's not critical, but I was just looking through it. I was looking at the pension bond obligation bonds and the payments on that. What's accounting for kind of the variability in that? I mean, I think we issued maybe $2 billion ago. So I was just wondering, because sometimes it looks like it's staggered a little bit. I expect it would be reduced over time, right? Because we're paying off more principal and interest, but then I'm looking at some of the numbers and they're going up and then they're going down again. How do you guys account for that?
Yeah, it's so there's let me start with where it started, which is so in 2008 we issued $2 billion worth of pension obligation bonds. So we issued that 2008. That created $156 million of level debt service until 2040. So we have $156 million that we have to pay level debt service to pay off those pension obligation bonds. Now, what we get is we get a credit on those expenses that amounts to 6% of our base labor. So that is coming from the pension contributions that we're matching to employee contributions. So employees right now are paying 13 and change % towards the pension. CTA is obligated to double that.
Okay.
So employees pay 13%, we pay 26%. Now what we get is we get 6 percentage points of that credited back against our pension obligation bond expense. So the variability comes from how much of that 26% we're paying, like total amount that we're paying.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Ready for the next one?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to the next agenda topic.
Okay, we're
Capital program.
You're all ready?
Capital budget.
All right, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, capital budget. So looking at the capital side of things, 5-year budget, right? We were looking at a 1-year operating budget. The capital plan is a 5-year budget. The size, like I said, $6.95 billion. That is because we are bringing into place these discretionary programs and that capital investment grant, at least the portion that's in these 5 years, of over $1 billion in federal funding. And we're actively looking to make sure that we can get that signed by the federal government by January. So there's additional discretionary federal programs that come in here as well. We have the transit TIF funding that we're also bringing in there. That's specifically for the red line extension. That is close to $1 billion as well. And then we have our matching funds and some of those CTA bonds that help allow us to bring in those $2 billion in federal funds along with that $1 billion in additional local program. Major projects, as I mentioned, right, Lee is taking a lot of that attached directly to that project. But there's another number of major projects underneath here that are also funded within the capital program. And I'll go through a couple slides to talk about those. I don't think I need to remind you about what the red line extension is, but obviously we've awarded the contract. We're looking forward to work beginning. The design work has already started on that one. All stations accessible. So some big milestones in 2025 for all stations accessible. And it starts with the opening of those 4 stations on red purple modernization. So Red Line North getting 4 new accessible stations, huge victory for ridership across the red line. But to bring in 4 sort of fully accessible stations on the red line, going to be great for those who need it. It's also been great to have those stations open. Hopefully we'll see that translate on the ridership side to continue to boost that. Along with these additional stations here, which are having work done to make them accessible as well. So you can see that list down here. CDOT is managing the renovation at State and Lake, similar to what they did for the Damon station. So, and then we're also ramping up our rehab program to rehab some of those older elevators on the system, make them a little bit more reliable. So it doesn't, it doesn't change the station's vertical accessibility. It just makes them more reliable. And so we've dedicated $120 million in funding towards those ASAP initiatives to improve that accessibility. But 2025 is going to be a big year for bringing online more accessible stations. The bus electrification program, you're probably aware of the program we have to electrify the bus system. We obviously already have a fully electrified rail system. So we're continuing to do some additional assessments of our back of the house facilities to make sure that they're ready for electrification, and then putting funding towards those future orders of electric buses. Now we're hoping that the market is out there to provide those electric buses to us. Obviously us spending money is contingent on people being able to actually accept that money and deliver those buses, which I know has been a challenge in the current marketplace. But we're doing our part on our side by making sure that we're continuing to allocate funding to pursue those electric buses. And then continued modernization. The new standard buses are fantastic, right? We're continuing to get delivery of those 600 new standard buses that are out on the street. We are looking at midlife overhauls of that 7,900 series of buses, along with life extending overhaul of some of our oldest buses in the system. On the rail side, we're continuing delivery of the 7,000 series. We've got, close to 150 delivered right now of that base order of 400. So we still have a long ways to go in getting those. Hopefully what we'll start to see is some of those oldest of the old rail cars coming off the system and really improving the reliability of the rail system from the vehicle perspective. We're also going to replace the camera system on those 3,200 and those 5,000 series, the other 2 remaining series that are out there after the 2,600 gets retired. And then we've got a number of other sort of support equipment here that's being sort of either overhauled or replaced as well. And then in terms of the overall calendar, so those are highlights from the capital program. In terms of the overall calendar, we released the budget last week. We're here presenting to the Citizens Advisory Committee today. We're going to talk to the Cook County Board next week. We have the official public hearing on November 7th. That's in advance of the CTA Board's consideration of the budget at their November 13th board meeting. It's due to the RTA on the 15th. We present to the RTA on November 22nd, and then the RTA board will vote on it on the 19th. So with that, I'll take any questions on the capital program or any other. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question about the Red Line Extension project. I think the CTA recently announced that the price had gone up by more than $1 billion. And they said that they were going to make up for the difference with CTA issued bonds. How does that affect future capital proposals? Like, where is that money coming from? Does this mean that, we're going to have to delay other projects? Does it mean, $1 billion is a lot of money.
Yeah, so we put that in there, and it's in the out years of the program where we put that additional funding. Something that's been really helpful is that the federal government has agreed to advance some of their funding. So previously in their FFGA, I think a lot of the funding had come in 2030 or beyond 2030, and now they're putting more of that funding earlier in the project, which means we can rely a little bit more heavily on some of that federal funding earlier in the project before we start to get into local funding. And those capital bonds are local funding, right? So that is local funding along with our other local funding sources. So what it didn't affect anything in the capital program, so it didn't sort of squeeze anything out of the existing capital program. Obviously, you know, it's funding that's out there and it's in future years. And one of the things that we're going to look to do is kind of reduce the burden that has, look for other opportunities where we might be able to get some funding that could potentially reduce some of that local funding that we have in there. But right now we have it there, it's committed. You know, we will put it into the project to make sure that the project gets done and make sure that we get those $2 billion in federal funding along with that $1 billion in TIF funding that's really going to help make this project real.
And then the other question I had, so I know the CTU recently proposed basically sunsetting every tip in the city to pay for CPS. Would that kill the Red Line Extension project if we lost all that tip money?
So I'm glad our general counsel is here in the room too, listening in. I know they've done an analysis on this. Do you want to comment on that, Kent?
A general counsel, we have a intergovernmental agreement with the city of Chicago that establishes that commits the funds we talked about.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a general question. All right. Yeah, very general question. So yeah, over 5 years, $6.9 billion, and a fiscal cliff of 500 million. How many of these capital projects would be on the chopping block to fill that gap?
Yeah, so the capital budget and the operating budget sort of sit in different realms, primarily because of their sources of funding, right? Federal funds, the federal government, outside of the relief funding, only funds capital for any agency that's serves a population that's greater than a couple 100,000, right? They still provide operating assistance for other agencies, but large agencies and medium-sized agencies don't get direct operating assistance from the federal government. What we do get is we get participation in the capital program. So we get, when we have a federal infrastructure bill, right, a portion of that will be allocated towards transit. And that's what we're using for Red Line Extension. That's what we're using for what we call our federal formula funds. So those have to go towards capital projects. The other local money that's there is the state money that's there, and that also has to go towards capital projects. So we're not seeing an impact on the capital budget from that operating deficit. You know, you might see some minor impacts around the edges of it, but I wouldn't expect any significant impact on the capital side of things when we're looking at the operating deficit.
Thank you. Yeah. So one of the other organizations I'm a part of is Sierra Club Environmentalists, right? And so I would just want to say that if we have to cut it, you know, 50% of transit service come the fiscal cliff, but we're still spending hundreds of millions on bus electrification, I would see that as kind of a mismatch of, you know, climate priorities. That's all I've got.
I think the first thing we try and emphasize is that the best thing you can do to reduce your emissions is to use public transit.
Okay.
So, yes.
Quick question for you. Speaking of electrification, two things. Number one, owning an electric vehicle myself, right? I understand, like, you know, it's not like when you need to refuel, you don't just put gas in it right away and you're off to go. You need to charge, right? And so the more buses that we're relying on charges, it would lead me to think that we just need more buses than we used to have underneath diesel operations, just because we have to let them sit to charge. And then with the rate, so that's a correct assumption, correct?
Currently, right? I mean, there's a lot of speculation about the technology and where's the technology going to go and how can you account for this? But we may have a diesel bus that's on the street for 20 hours. Right now, there's not an electric bus that can stay on the street for 20 hours.
And then so the other thing is with the increase in electric prices and the more we move over to electric fleet, is there ever, from a capital standpoint, does the math add up for us to start investing in like our own like renewable energy on the bus barns, like putting in solar? Is the math there to say like, hey, yeah, if we invest in, you know, this solar or this wind on our bus barns and we can charge our batteries or charge our vehicles, you know, has that math been done, or does any of that make sense?
The math has been done and we're not there yet, right? We'd still need some supplemental funding to help make it real. It's just not enough power to really, to move the needle. Yeah.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Just to piggyback off of Robert's question regarding like sustainability efforts, as the red line extension design is underway, is that components around sustainability, whether that be wind technology or solar, being considered for the new designs of the extension, like on the station rooftops or anything like that?
Yeah, and then I'm looking up because I'm thinking, right, to the project and sort of, and obviously sustainability can mean a lot of things in the construction of a project. So there is definitely a sustainability in the construction of the project in terms of the actual sort of components and amenities to it, in terms of the sort of long-term operating. Is there renewable power? I don't know the answer to that question. It's something we have to probably talk to the Red Line Extension team about.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions?
Okay. One more presentation to make.
So I guess we can move on to the public performance measures.
Okay, so let me just stop sharing and switch my share. Should not have hit escape there, but hopefully I can get this down. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, and we want to make sure that this board sees some of our public performance measures. They've been out for a little while now, but I wanted to take you through them, and we have some results from them as well. So I'll take you through some of the live results. It is part of the duties within our realm of responsibility is providing these public performance measures. So just a little bit of background here. In terms of our public performance reporting, we first started in 2006 providing some basic performance reports, really focused on complaints and cleaning and vehicle performance, obviously ridership, always of interest. We formally created a performance management unit in 2007 and then started to standardize some of those public measures. And for a long time, they were published in a very static PDF of an Excel spreadsheet format. So not very interactive, not very engaging if you wanted to drill into further information. So we started developing internally more dashboards for development purposes, and then to start doing some more sort of detailed analysis using more interactive dashboards. We also started doing our transit asset management program and that reporting, which also helped sort of develop the tools that we had available to us. In 2022, we released the Meeting the Moment plan, and that included a dashboard of metrics, and that allowed us the opportunity to upgrade our public performance measures and start to use more of an interactive format with them. In addition, this Public Act, House Bill 1342, came into effect in this current year. It's in effect for this year and for next year. It details a number of required reports for the CTA and for the other service boards in the region. You can read the full act here, right, in terms of what it requires in terms of reporting. And so we had an eye towards this as we released those metrics in 2022, noting that you wanted to make sure that we were meeting the requirements of the act or developing the reports that would make sure that we met the requirements of this act as well. So what we currently have published is over 21 pages of reports on 6 different performance categories. This is a snapshot of our public performance dashboard that's available on our site. And I am actually going to stop sharing and go live to our website. So let's hope that everything works as planned. So this is our website, transitchicago.com/performance, and I will make this a little bit larger. So you can see here's those 21 pages of reports. It's going to have data up through September of this year. And so I will start on the hiring page, just to give a sense of where we are in terms of our headcount. So we looked at our operating headcount for both bus operators and for rail operators. This obviously was one of the critical measures in meeting the moment and something that we carried forward here. We also provide our pre-pandemic headcount, so you get a sense of where we were going into the pandemic in terms of our headcount for both bus operators and for those rail operating employees. If you want the exact numbers, you can show it as a table and you can drill into there. one thing too, not just looking sort of, not just at the, what is in the report, but actually the content and kind of analyzing a little bit, you can see really good trends here, right? So when we talk about a labor variance getting reduced and how that has occurred throughout this year, you can see that that's as a direct result of putting more people in positions like this. So it provides a little bit more insight into some of those measures as well. Definitely start hitting those goals that we had to restore service and have the personnel in place to be able to restore that service. We have specific metrics around hiring, so you can see sort of what's getting added and what's getting subtracted from each of those positions on a monthly basis as well. I'm not going to go into absenteeism. I'm happy to if you want to, but there's not a lot of movement on that one. I want to talk a little bit more about actual performance now, as we talked about service reliability. There's a couple of measures that we've historically looked at in terms of bus performance. That is the bunching of the buses. So how many buses are running within 60 seconds of each other? And then also the large gaps between buses. So 15 minutes and double the normal headway. So pretty extreme case of gapping between buses. So interestingly, what you're seeing here is definitely a good year-over-year improvement in terms of those gaps between buses. So 6.7%, 5.0% reduction in gaps. At the same time, there's been a little bit of an increase in bunch buses. So what this means, more services out there, so more buses are getting bunched. Thankfully, you've had fewer of those large gaps between service, but you still have an opportunity to reduce some of those bunching that the buses are occurring. Now, what you can do is if you're interested in a particular route, you can look at that route. So I might look at a route that, I might take a little bit more frequently, like the number 49, and you can click on that route and you can see there's a little bit more bunching on this route than there is in the system as a whole. Makes a little bit of sense because there's more service on Western. And those big gaps have gone down from 10% down closer to slightly less than 8%. So that's what this interactive dashboard allows. It allows you to really drill into the data itself.
Are these intervals by month?
These are by month. So this is the sum of all the intervals over the course of a month. On the rail side of things, we're going to look at a couple things. First of all, we start with delays. So these are major delays greater than 10 minutes or more on the rail system, which usually causes kind of a backlog and some inconsistent intervals. These are all the categories that we have for those types of delays. So maintenance means a vehicle issue. Operations would mean something with the operator. Track and signal is as described. We have disturbances, passenger delays, other things. And then we trend this out even by day of the month. So you could see when we might have had a particular challenge on a particular day within the month, and you could choose whatever month you want to look at there. You can also select the line and so start to take a look at different lines. So what you see on the red line, you've got a lot more major delays around disturbances. So you see that contributing to diminished performance on the red line. You look at the brown line, a lot more around the vehicles, right? The older vehicles are running on the red line. And so you see some of that performance, especially interesting during the winter here, right? Impacting performance on the brown line. So you start to get into some of those intricacies of the lines and how the lines themselves are different from each other and the sources of the delays on those lines.
Tom, can you click on the green line?
I most certainly can. So the green line here, I have not done this analysis yet, so we're doing it together. You can see it's a mix, right? It's a mix of some vehicle issues, right? And some kind of operations track signal issues, and then a few disturbances in there, passenger delays as well. Not every day has a major delay on the green line. So that's a positive, I would say, from that particular one. But there have been particular days, right, where you've had multiple delays, which would have really diminished service on the green line.
We have one of our members who has a store very close to the Green Line and has an employee who has had a lot of Green Line stories. So I just wanted to make sure we highlighted that for our committee person, Pal.
Thank you. And if you want to select
the source,
I'm paying a lot of attention to this one right here.
You can even look at your station, right? And click on your station.
Right. Well,
it's a new use. I do appreciate that. It's a new use. And then of interest as well, you can look at the headways and what is the headway performance. And so what we can see is how many double and triple headways do we have for the month on those lines. As I mentioned, something like the Brown line, where we've had a little bit of an increase in major delays, right? It's seen an increase in some of those headways. The system as overall has been relatively stable after coming down from the spring level of those double and triple headways. Green line has seen some improvement in terms of the number of double and triple headways on the system, as has the red line and the pink line. In addition, we look at something, it's more of an industry metric. It's called excess wait time. So this looks at the scheduled wait time and then the actual wait time and then the difference between the two of them. So it gets at the difference in those two wait times, and we trend that out. You can see here, as we've improved the schedules, the scheduled wait time has come down. And thankfully, the actual wait time has come down as well, as has this excess wait times here. So you can see that August was a low for the past 12 months in terms of that excess wait time, but September has been relatively low as well, given historical trends. And you could see then we even trend this out by day. So every day through the month of September, you can see what that particular excess wait time was. And then again, if you're interested in the green line, you could see what it was from the green line. And then you could see particular days on the green line.
3 days ago. That's what
Real-time data so that you can.
Do appreciate it. Same thing on the bus side, same types of metrics. I will highlight the scheduled wait time has come down. The actual wait time has come down as well. The summer months, there's a lot more congestion, right? And we do see that showing up here as well. And then you can click on particular routes. And then if we go forward, mileage and slow zones. So we look at total vehicle mileage that's driven by the buses and the rails. So we talk about service that's filled, but with our workforce, but this is actual service that's delivered with the vehicles and service that's run. So bus mileage and rail mileage, good increases year over year. That's what we want to see as we're increasing service. We have the slow zone mileage then here below so that you can look at the percentage of the trains in slow zones. Click here and you can find the detailed maps of where those slow zones are. Fleet information, this gets a little bit crowded and maybe a little bit more into the weeds in terms of our fleet, but we're going to look at the bus side first, and we have 4 different bus types within our fleet. You can see that 1000 series actually has the largest number of buses. It's also the oldest. I don't know who, for those of you that do own a car, my guess is that your car is not from 2006, right? But we have almost 1,000 buses where we started delivery in 2006. So to that comment about technology, placing, getting upgrades in technology, our fleet is particularly old at this point in time. And so really critical that we continue those new buses, which are part of that 7900 series that's being delivered. 2014 was an initial delivery. We're continuing delivery today, but to make sure that we get those to replace this 1000 series. And then what you can see here is the defects. So mean miles between defect. Higher is better in this particular chart. So the newest buses are performing the best. Those 7900s are at the top here. The 1000 series, those 40-foot buses are performing okay, right? And that's a credit to our maintenance team that's able to keep those buses from almost 20 years ago still running. The 40-foot buses, the 60-foot buses, again, they're similar age and they are particularly challenging just because they're bigger, right? They got a lot more going on. So you can see here, they're a little bit lower on those mean miles between defect as well. And then you get a good sense of what our fleet looks like and sort of the road ahead of us as we look to electrification. That's the 600 series that's in there, which is our initially electrified fleet. Same thing on the rail side. So rail, we have currently 4 fleets that are in service, the 2600 being the oldest. Those were delivered starting in 1981. So those are really old vehicles. So anything, our standard useful life on a rail vehicle is 35 years. The FTA advises at least a minimum of 25 years. So we say, okay, we'll do 35.
What line is this 81 series? Like,
we go back to some of the performance that we saw and the vehicles impacting that performance. The brown line has some of them, right?
Okay.
So, yeah.
It's the orange line.
Yep.
has some pretty old ones too.
Yes, they would have them as well, right? Because they kind of have a shared fleet between the two of them. So anytime you see a rail vehicle that starts with the number 26 to, 31, those are that part of that 2600 fleet. And so those were delivered between 81 and maybe 84. Yes, they are particularly old within the fleet. Yes.
These are big brown and orange, and then 3200s are shared between the blue line and the brown line.
Correct.
5000s are red, yellow, green, pink, and purple. And then the 7000s are currently blue.
Yep, exactly.
Is our train.
Good. That's great. That's perfect. I appreciate that. So then we can look at more service delivery. We'll look at it on the rail side. I'm actually going to start with the scheduled and delivered. So this is showing what is in our operating schedule and then how much we're actually delivering off that operating schedule. So this is actually on a week by week basis. So it'll show you how much was scheduled and how much was delivered on a week by week basis, both system wide and by line. One thing I will note here, right, we've increased the schedule and then the service has increased as well. So the actual service out there, there's more trains now than there was a year ago that are out there. That's because for all of the reasons that we've talked about, you can see where that service is, right? A big jump on the blue line in terms of that service, along with some of these other lines. You'll see this change again in November when we update the schedule again and add back that additional service that was optimized. So good trend here. You can also look at Saturdays and Sundays as well and see what it looks like on those days in addition to the weekday. So now I'll go back to the percent delivery. So using those same numbers, we look at what percentage of that scheduled service was delivered. We can also look at that by day of the month as well. You can see here, again, a good trend, right? Trending up towards 95% of that scheduled service delivered, which is sort of where we were pre-pandemic. So that's a good trend to see, even as we've added that additional service into the schedules, that we've been able to actually deliver and meet that service. Same information on the bus side. So scheduled and delivered, you can see these jumps in the schedule. The bus schedule gets adjusted 4 times a year. So there's a few more steps in here, but you can see we're sort of hitting kind of right at that 99% delivery rate in terms of that bus service that's out there. We're looking at hours rather than trips here when we look at on the bus side. And then if we go back, you can see that trend in terms of service delivery, right? Touching up on 99% service delivered, where we were at 98% a year ago with a lower schedule. So we've been able to keep up that service delivery, even as we've added additional hours back into the schedule. And then moving from that service, we have customer service metrics. So we look at customer complaints. Good trend here, both in the absolute number of complaints. This is the line that's up here. And then in the normalized number of complaints per rider, you can see a decreasing trend here. So that's great to see. That's been driven primarily by those schedule complaints coming down. So these are the service delays and overcrowding complaints that we've seen get reduced over time. We have also seen a good trend on the security side, where we saw a pretty marked increase last year, and that has come down since April in terms of those security complaints that we have seen as well. Not to be forgotten, on the bottom, we have commendations. So these are shout outs to our employees for good service. You'll see March is when we have Transit Employee Appreciation Day. So we got a lot of commendations around Transit Employee Appreciation Day.
What's is there like a rate or percentage that you can share in terms of it's glad to see that March is really highlighted, but I guess across a number of riders, what percentage of folks are submitting commendations and what is it's very small. Okay.
All right. So even here in the complaints, it's per 100,000 riders. So we look at 5.6 per 100,000. These are just actual numbers. We got 90 commendations in September, right? And you think we're carrying close to 1 million a day in September. So it's a relatively small number of commendations that we get. Obviously, they're really important and meaningful to the employees.
Yeah.
Facility uptime, that's where we measure elevators and escalators. So we look at our elevator and escalator uptime. Good trend here on the elevators. So the initiation of some of those rehabs, getting some additional escalators or elevators in shape. On the escalator side, it's kind of flat in terms of where we're at with escalators. A lot of these are older escalators. They're kind of oddly shaped escalators. They're, you know, the original escalators that we have are from the 40s, some of the original ones that were installed along with the subway. So these are a challenge to consistently maintain. They get a lot of elements exposed to them. But having a greater than 90% uptime is pretty good for these escalators. Then you can look at it by line to see what the trend is by particular line.
Sorry.
On the safety side, we're reporting the metrics that we report to NTD. So we have our security and our safety related incidents per normalized per 100,000 miles of service delivery. And then on the cleaning side, we measure the number of deep cleans. So these are, you know, 4-hour levels of cleaning on the vehicles. So how many times a month are we cleaning the vehicles in a really deep way? This is where we said we've added some additional cleaning resources. A number of those are allocated towards additional deep cleaning of the vehicles. So it's good to see these numbers going up. You will note that in the winter, sometimes we have to focus on more shorter cleans, just to a little bit more spot cleaning, just to clean things up in the winter because things do get so dirty. So you'll see those deep cleans go down a little bit in the winter, but we are trying to hit more vehicles as a result of that reallocation.
Give you a positive comment. An acquaintance who rides the CTA all the time from the O'Hare to downtown, was commenting that the trains smell clean.
That's great. That's great. That's great to hear. We will take it.
I've had to take the train to O'Hare a few times this summer and it was actually quite pleasant.
Well, hopefully that's a direct result of some of the numbers that you're seeing here in terms of the number of additional deep cleans that we've been able to perform on the fleet. And this is also where you see the output of our Second Chance program, because our Second Chance program is first directs folks towards vehicle cleaning. There's also some station cleaning opportunities as well. So this is a result of the fact that we've been able to fill up the Second Chance program as well. And a lot of them are doing the deep cleaning of these vehicles. So that concludes my update on the public performance measures.
Thank you. Are there any questions as it relates to the performance measures presentation?
I can do the first one. I really like the platform. It looks nice. It allows for transparency, accountability. One thing I would like to say is that this is an issue I have throughout, but specifically with like slow zones. We see very slight increase in the last 15 months, but over the last 5 years, they've doubled. And my understanding is that in the last 10 years, they've quadrupled. We miss that kind of long-term effect when we're only looking back at the last 15 months. And I think, you know, whoever designed the website might have even known that when they added the numbers for pandemic headcount on bus and rail. So like, oh, that's probably the important numbers to look back more than 15 months. And so that's just one thing I wanted to call out. Slow zones quadrupling in 10 years, I think, is one of the unacceptable things that's been happening at the CTA. And I wonder how much of our capital planning that we were talking about earlier is dedicated to that, as opposed to, say, you know, the new Damon Green Line station that had the elevator break in the first week of opening. That's just something I wanted to call out. Yeah, I don't know if.
Yeah, let me pull up the report here again and we can just talk about slow zones. I do appreciate that, right? It's some of the longer term trends are going to be harder to pick out here, right? Which is, you're right. That's why we put that head count on there, is so that we could go back to 2019. The start is fixed at the start of 2022. So as we sort of accumulate and report more data, that you will be able to sort of expand those charts. So at the beginning, I didn't show that there was a little date selector there that you could select a date. So to allow for more than 13 months of data visible there starting in January of 2022. But again, it's not going to have that long term. Some of the stuff we do put in the budget book, right, to show a little bit more longer trend. Let me go back to the mileage page here. You'll see the slow zone mileage. And even this year, right, year over year, you're going from 16 to 22. You sort of have to take out the yellow line, right, which is in kind of in a reduced signal slow zone right now. You can see that one is impacting the overall numbers. But on something like the blue line, you know, 29% is particularly high for a line, especially one that's that long. If you looked at the map, you'd see it's all in the Forest Park branch, which is why we've been advocating for sort of a rebuild of that Forest Park branch to really resolve the slow zones there. If that's, if we just targeted that branch, that would be closer to 80% slow zone, which impacts the entire blue line. And that's the sort of thing where we are actively looking for more capital funding to make sure that we can rebuild those places where we know are long-term need to be rebuilt. The next is future phases of RPM, right? RPM, as the official name, is Red Purple Modernization Phase 1, right? Because there are additional phases envisioned that would look at sort of fixing some of those long-term issues in terms of stations and station accessibility that exist further north on the red and the purple lines.
Could I just ask, is there any particular upshot, the absenteeism tab? Is there like more layers or, I guess, definitions behind it? I am curious about it.
Yeah, so here's the trend. Here's why I said there wasn't a lot there because it's relatively flat in terms of absenteeism. I think you will note here on the rail side, some of the, I don't know if it was seasonality or something else that was going on here, right? Kind of earlier in the year, but we were able to get that trend down by, you know, I think we've invested a lot in employees and recognition and additional sort of benefits and support for employees. Certainly there's more room to go there to help improve that. But one of the factors that we want to make sure that we're impacting is absenteeism, right? And making sure that we're helping folks show up on time and that we've got additional support if folks aren't able to show up to work. We've seen a decrease in here on the bus side. I think a lot of this is we have new folks coming in, right? And we do see new folks, right? They're sort of, especially in their early years, right? Their attendance is pretty strong. I think over time, this may be something that may trend back up, but it's something that we do keep an eye on. I think in absenteeism, the absolute level is important for planning how much of an extra board you want to carry. So how many additional operators you want to have there, but that variability is really challenging, right? It's like, it's building the church for Easter Sunday. You know what I mean? It's like, it's how do you plan for that Monday after the Super Bowl, which every employer in the country says is a challenge for getting folks to work, right? So how do you make sure that you can plan for those things by, you know, encouraging as many people who are scheduled to work to come to work, but then also having enough to be able to support when you know some of those big call-off days are coming?
I'm sure it was no coincidence you mentioned that. I feel like that's always the anecdote people point out. It's that Monday after the Super Bowl or the Sunday of the Super Bowl. I understand it's really challenging too, because you're right. I don't see a lot of movement in there, but it's probably like hot spots, right? When I was at the city, always came up a bunch as well. And I know it's really tricky to kind of pin down for. I'm very sympathetic to that. And you guys have the extra burden of the fact that if people don't show up to work, other people can't get from A to B, right? And it's very, very noticeable, whereas, you know.
So we've tried to do some additional employee communications around the importance of showing up to work and showing up to work every day. You know, Mother's Day is another one where we see sort of high call-offs on Mother's Day, and I can appreciate that. So one thing that we try to do is kind of create that sense of accountability to your team and to the customers that you're serving of like, hey, you know, if you don't show up for your scheduled work, right, you know, you're putting more of a burden on your teammates, right? But you're potentially leaving folks waiting, right, who might need that ride to again to celebrate the holiday in that way. So plan for it, right? So it is a challenge that, you know, I think we all recognize that it's a challenge when you're running a 24/7 system.
Is there like a definition of it within CTA?
Yeah, so we say up here, right, absent due to unforeseen circumstances. So that would be sick, right, or a miss, or somebody just doesn't show up to work, right? Not holidays or planned vacations, things like that.
Got it.
Well, in law firms, the largest single hassle has always been to get the people to turn their timesheets in on time, so we could send the bills out. And so we flipped the whole process as opposed to a negative, slapping someone's hand. We turned it to a positive, that when you turn your timesheets in on time, then you get an economic incentive for having successfully done that.
That's an interesting approach. Has it worked?
Oh yeah, we moved it from from a substantial percentage point of it. We always need 300 in the law firm. You could, by doing that, you could get it down to 10 or 12 people as opposed to 60.
Thank you.
I know you're the finance guy, but you are presenting on performance and management. I noticed, I think you said when you said the slide that there was like on the slide about like customer feedback, it was a very small sample of like customer feedback. Is that fair?
Yeah, I can go to that page, right? I mean, it's total number. We do absolute value and then we normalize it.
You know, the point is, it made me think, right? Because this is, to your point, it's like a lot of amazing information. And it seems like we're keeping track as the CTA about, you know, what we're supposed to be doing. Are we doing it? But yet we have this issue that we say is affecting ridership, which is security, and rider experience. And so the first thing I went to do is go look at the CTA app. There's no CTA app, but there is a like phone browser friendly like site that the CTA has, and it gives you schedules, fares, maps, but there's nowhere that collects rider experience or rider, you know, the praise or the complaints. And so I think it would be in the best interest of the CTA, right? To have an app in 2024 like that, because any app that you see that says CTA on it, it also says not affiliated with the CTA, right? Because just in the ride here, right? Waiting for the train, and there's a bunch of guys drinking and trains are coming in and going, and they're never leaving, so they're obviously there, right? And it's like you can't just go on the app and be like, hey, there's guys drinking here, like they're you know, they need to be removed or whatever it is you're dealing with, you know, within CTA. So I think when it comes to performance management and statistics, just as much effort as we go into capturing like the infrastructure side of it, we should try to capture the user side of it, because ultimately what this comes down to is even if we're doing all those things, but ridership is going down, like we don't know why.
They just unveiled the QR code on the train. So it's like an instant, you just scan it and it goes to the website.
I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of like public QR codes because you never know who puts something over that QR code. And so I don't do public QR codes. Yeah.
And that in response to your concern, they have unveiled this. And yes, I agree. QR codes are, you know, kind of crazy right now. People are doing some wild stuff. But that is one way that the CTA is trying to get that instant feedback. And maybe it's not the best way, but it's a start.
And so to that point, like where does it pointing you to? Because wherever it's pointing you to, it should be like, you should also have the ability, because I kind of like, you know, you get the email from your bank and you can click on the link to take you to your bank, or you can just go right to the bank site and do the same thing. So whatever that QR code is pointing people to, I should be able to go on the CTA's you know, mobile interface and see that exact same thing without having to scan that link. And that's an easy technology fix.
Yeah, agreed.
I keep on my phone the CTA website and use it to plan trips. I mean, anything that you potentially could do in an app, I do with just a shortcut put on my desktop, including the fact of having a horrible ride on a bus, using the contact us and sending the drivers detailed information of who it was, time, bus route, and all that stuff, and receiving a response directly from the CTA as to what they did regarding. So I think there's a solution to it, and I think it's there. You just have to use the tools that are sitting there. It has been my experience.
Yeah, and that's my point. I guess you're right. The tools probably are there. They're just not readily accessible, right? So if we want more feedback from riders
on my phone.
I'm looking at the CTA interface for the phone, and it's not there.
Yeah, it's under contact us.
It's on the chat box on the bottom.
maybe having an easier.
There you go, easier, yeah.
So that you don't have to go through the website to find it. Maybe there's a shortened web address that goes directly to this page that Kirby's speaking of, or creating an app, or I don't know, like the Venture app has some things within it, but I mean, it's kind of funky. But like, you know, kind of like building on some tools that already exist so that people don't have to relearn something new. Like everybody knows you go to the Venture app to pay for your transit. So if there's a way to kind of combine that within that space, so you don't have to have another app. Like I don't have room on my phone for extra apps. So I'm gonna put the stuff that I need. Venture is something I need. So if you can add that to Venture, or if, you know, change Venture to be like this larger thing that encompasses both being able to pay for your transit and also, you know, checking schedules and mapping and, you know,
Yeah.
submitting complaints or whatever. Like if there's a space to do that in one place, that ease is very important.
Yeah, and I would say like in 2024, like if you don't have an app, like you're not trying, you know, like if you're saying like, go to our website.
The Netherlands app for their transportation system is amazing. I know like comparing anything in the United States to Europe is, you know, a farce, but it's aspirational, you know.
I mean, an app is an app, like literally, people can't like just hit an app and just like go to it at this point. I don't you know how you can make it any easier. Like my experience as a business owner is that people tend to complain before they say good things. So they're gonna talk, your complainers are gonna get on the app, whereas people who are having a great experience probably not. You know, that's just been my experience as a business owner. But, you know, I mean, I don't know how we can make it that much easier. I mean, like.
I think that because transit is app focused now. Like you're tapping your phone or your watch. That's what I've been doing. You know, you're tapping these devices to get on the transit. So you have to have an app to access it. So my thinking would be that people are actively using these apps and would prefer, to Robert's point, to be able to have an easy way to tap into all of the things related to CTA in one place.
I mean, they make apps for like music festivals that are for 1 weekend.
Right, and you just
I don't
delete
know
it
what-
where you're
yeah,
done.
right.
But for this is something
This
that's
is, like,
part of our
huge. Yeah,
lives.
it's
We are
everyday
using this
thing.
every day. So like, yeah, having an app that has that easy access across all of the different things would be ideal.
Yeah, no, appreciate it, but I'm glad you saw the QR codes, right?
Yes. That's a start.
Yeah. Back, right? I mean, we want to start getting more information where we can. And also the reference to the chatbot too, which I think is helpful for some of those. Thank you.
And so presentation was good, but like piggyback on everybody, you know, I think the reason why we're having that low, you know, rate of, okay, well, I don't understand it. And it's partly due to the reason that they have the tools to reset, to access it, but they don't want to. They don't take the time to. They're like, oh, well, this is bad. I'm like, well, why is it bad? Well, they can't give me an answer. Okay, so how are you gonna tell me it's bad? You don't know why it's bad. That's you know, that's the good part of, you know, by having that QR code, you know, expanding that. I'm thinking they could put it at all the terminals on the rail line or the bus line or something like, hey, it doesn't just have to be on the train, but I mean, when you get to O'Hare, when you get to Midway, you know, Ashland 63rd, Harlem and Lake, you know, something like that, hey, how did my ride go or something like that? But I mean, yeah, it's accessible, but it's about if people are going to take those resources and actually use it, you know, like put it in, execute it. So thank you.
And I appreciate that.
Chairperson Reagan.
I'm ready to go. Sorry, that was probably inappropriate. But if there aren't any other questions or comments, I would love to.
I'll volunteer that there is no new business.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. I don't think we have anything else on our agenda, so I'd like someone to call this. Thank you.
Second.
That's all right.
Hi, Robert. Turn the meeting and seconded Mr. Henderson. We'll take a roll call vote. Castaneda.
Aye.
Peter Henderson.
Aye.
Bob Johnson.
Aye. Thank you.
Chairperson Raby.
Hi.
Brian McCray.
Aye.
Tracy Powell.
Aye.
Kirby Scott Vanderpool.
Aye.
All right.
And thank you so much. Sorry, I was supposed to say that before adjourning.
Thank you. I appreciate all your comments. So we definitely do. Thank you.